Now let's talk about phase one requirement in brief, right? Now when it comes to invoice, right? What are the means of generation? It has to be through an electronic mean. What are the fields? Everything which has been mentioned, as a part of phase one, which was practically there in VAT, has to be there both for standard and simplified tax invoice. Now, when it comes to format, there has been no specific format, at least for phase one. This differs in phase two, and we'll talk about it. Now, when it comes to invoice storage, invoice must be archived and accessible to the authority at any given point of time, starting phase one itself. Now, let's talk about security and integrity. When it comes to QR code, for a tax invoice, this is optional. You can start generating the QR code starting phase one itself. However, when it comes to simplified tax invoice, this is a mandatory field or a mandatory matrix that needs to be present and printed on your simplified tax invoice. Now, when it comes to integration or the ability to connect to the internet, both for standard and simplified tax invoice, your invoice solution unit should have an ability to connect to the internet for this. Now, when it comes to invoice clearance and reporting, this is not a part of phase one, but definitely gets added as a part of phase two. Now, in phase two, let's just talk about what are the differences. Now, invoice fields, right? The government has mandated, a lot of fields that gets added as a part of phase two, and all of it needs to be adhered to. Not everything goes on the printed invoice, but a lot of them go in the XML format that the government is wanting us to create as a part of phase two. Invoice format. The government says that both standard tax invoice and simplified tax invoice needs to be there in an XML format or a PDF A3 format with an embedded XML. This is important to know. The PDF A3 would be basically the human readable format. And if it is embedded with an XML, that becomes the machine readable format through which ZATCA would be, giving us the clearance. Now, when it comes to security and integrity, we saw that there was just QR code in phase one. However, there is multiple other items gets added in phase two, like cryptographic stamp, device registration, UUID, along with hash. Even the QR code would go through some changes as a part of phase two. When it comes to integration, and how does it differ when we say, the solution should be able to connect to the internet? Now, standard tax invoice, before you issue to the buyer, it has to have a capability to connect to the internet. That means it is practically always supposed to be connected for a real-time clearance from the government. When it comes to simplified tax invoice, it is just required for syncing, which says 24 hours from generation. Invoice clearance. Now, this is an additional thing that gets added. For standard tax invoice, it's a real-time connectivity with ZATCA via an API. And for simplified tax invoice, it is just upload of invoices to the ZATCA within 24 hours of generation, and you get an acknowledgement back from the government in this case.